It happened.
We're all here. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Usually, when we do interview shows, we tend to put like something profound our guest has said at the beginning instead of doing like a cold open. And we always just like waste perfectly good cold open material during interview shows. I just have to throw it away. So I think we're just gonna. Actually, Alex, if you have something profound to say right now, that would be really helpful.
God, I have nothing profound to say on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, we'll edit something in.
I'm really glad to be here with you guys. How about that?
Hey, yeah, well, welcome to The Empire Never Ended. Alex with Boris, Fritz, and Ray. Yeah.
Yo.
We are indeed joined by a longtime friend of the show. Last time you were on was, I think, almost exactly 2 years ago. Like maybe just,
really?
just
Was it
a
that
couple.
long?
It was. Yeah, we had you guys on to talk about the rise of ecofascism, climate change, and the far right, which you guys put out in 2022. And I think our interview happened right when the US version got released, so that was how long ago it was.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And in that time, at some point, I think, Alex, you mentioned that your co-host for 12 Rules for What, which is, of course, your amazing podcast, your co-host at the time, Sam Moore, was, I believe you said, horny about Madison Grant. And that just sparked a 2-year note in my head that at some point, these are the guys to talk to about it. And we're really, really glad to have you, Alex, on the show to finally explain what's so hot about this guy.
Judging by his face, not much, I guess.
What? He's the man, the mustache, Madison Grant.
I can't speak for Sam in every matter of his life, but
Sure.
There's a really funny caption of a photograph in a biography of Madison Grant called "Defending the Master Race," where the author comments on Madison Grant's superior long head skull composition, and so I think maybe that's what attracted Sam to his beautiful bonds.
That is definitely it. And since he's not here today to speak for himself, I think we'll just have to take that as gospel.
Bam.
Of course, yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, and then I think last time we were on 12 Rules for What was to talk about the Turner Diaries with you guys. Yeah, and then immediately after that, Sam, I know, left the show. And so whatever we said, I just want to tell you right now that we're sorry. We clearly hit a nerve there.
I mean, we are still friends, so it wasn't a total a separation, but
it was Boris, right? He's hard to.
You know what? Something was said. We don't really have to go into it.
Okay,
we're all here.
All right.
So.
Well, I just wanted to clear the air there. Yeah, it was definitely Boris's fault. But
it always is. I mean, I've come to terms with that.
It's true.
To be fair to Sam, he has gone on to do a really interesting zine/board game about global collapse and crisis. So
no way.
He's doing things.
Awesome.
That is right up Fritz's alley.
Oh my god, yeah, that sounds good.
I'll send you the link after the episode, definitely.
All right, please do. Yeah, and 12 Rules for What is going on strong. There was actually I don't know if this was the last episode you guys did, but it was our listeners would really appreciate this. But it's the prehistory of Rock Against Communism. Last month or something? But that was right up Tenepod's alley there.
Yeah,
I think.
That was Alex Carter. Yeah,
yes, thank you. Yeah.
I think he's doing a lot of research on like Cable Street Beat and all those kind of cultural anti-fascist movements in England. It was super cool.
That's awesome.
I think our people should definitely check that one out in particular. But it's good to see. Good to see you're going strong. Still making great stuff, and that you remembered enough about this asshole Madison Grant to come back on and save us the trouble of having to research another fucking white guy. Sick of him.
I have been doing a fair amount of research, re-research, because as I said to you, Fritz, like, you know, the thing where you write a book and then 2 years later you're asked to remember what you wrote and you can't remember
Yes.
anything.
Yes.
So I've been plagiarizing myself quite freely. I'm quite happy to admit that.
Well, you know, if you're going to I'm sure I've plagiarized you freely on this show from time to time. So I suppose you're allowed to also.
Yeah.
No,
of
he's
course.
not. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. Okay. Well, and while you're on the show, it's okay, I suppose. Yeah. All right. Let me see. I got some.
So I guess this is part 3 in our eugenics series, and
Oh yeah, I guess it is.
we were kind of reaching the end of our wits with eugenicists, but this is a pretty big character to skip over, especially since I think we mentioned him in the last 2 episodes as well.
Sure.
Come on. We only read one small book about eugenics.
I know, but it's
There's
eugenics.
Yeah, okay.
It's just names. It's one of those topics that we have to do sometimes where it's just 100 names, and most of the names are like some variation of the same 3 or 4 names mixed up. But among that morass, Madison Grant, I think, stands alone, if nothing else, than for being one of Hitler's big heroes, along with Henry Ford.
Yeah, I mean, the famous quote that everyone goes to is that Hitler described Passing of the Great Race, which was Madison Grant's first book, as his Bible. And I think that's a kind of nice opening for our discussion, right? Like, Hitler really loved Madison Grant and his work.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, as this arc that we've started goes on, you know, that kind of thing becomes less and less of a surprise. In fact, at this point, I'm convinced that all you'd have to tell me was that this guy was rich and from an old family in the interwar period, and I would tell you he was a fascist. I feel like that's where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't listened to too many of the shows running up to this, but I think, you know, it's hard to get away from the fact that the American aristocratic class of the time was just incredibly anti-Semitic, incredibly racist, and, you know, like, really, despite the kind of America's ideals towards like a democratic republic or whatever, we're quite happy to be this patrician class that lauded it over all the other people, and we're content to like construct racial theories to confirm these assumptions and beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Madison Grant, you mentioned the name, but what's he best known for? He's best known for the Passing of the Great Race, right?
Well, I think Grant's actually for a long time Grant was mainly just known for his conservation work, which of course is intimately tied to his racism, his scientific racism, and Grant was quite happy to make these links all the time. But I think he went under the radar a fair bit because, for one thing, he was quite almost a reclusive character. He wrote a lot of letters to a lot of different people, and he was like a founder of like a billion different societies, saving various creatures and being involved in the eugenics and stuff like this. But he wasn't interested in writing like his own autobiography. He refused interviews. And Jonathan Spira, who's written this really amazing biography of Grant, like goes through all the difficulties of kind of researching him. Like a lot of his papers were destroyed or lost after his death. A lot of the people he corresponded.
I'm sure some very interesting ones too. Some very interesting measurements.
Yeah, right. And there was like just a bunch of like really weird coincidences in the decades after his death. Like, for example, an archive got flooded. On the bottom row of all the documents was completely lost, which happened to contain all of Madison Grant's papers. Another one was like, I think like an intern threw away a whole bunch of original letters, thinking they were copies, and actually there was literally no other copy in existence. And so what Spira had to do was kind of rescue a lot of work and tell the story of Grant through the organizations he was president of and was involved in, rather than looking at the actual documents that the man produced.
But that also gives you a pretty interesting sense of his situation, like the class networks that he was part of as well, and the institutional support that he had. So it's, you know, it's not for nothing still. He's still a pretty good study of the patrician class in the U.S. as a whole.
The book's like over 300 pages long. The guy had a lot of material to work with, like, and I think what like really startled me, like coming back to back to Grant was just how like part of that patrician class he was, not in the fact that he was born into it and he had this long family history of, you could trace his roots back to the very first Protestants who landed on the American continent.
Oh yeah, yep.
But like he in his early life, he joined the Boone and Crockett Club, which was founded by Teddy Roosevelt. Like he was writing letters to presidents in the 1920s, and he was kind of influential in a lot of different big policies, like the intermarriage laws in the South America. He was like a very key player in getting those through. And of course, the Immigration Restriction Act of 1925, which I think had the biggest impact on American society for the 20th century.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad we're going to bring that up. That was the old "we just want the Nordics" bill. No, is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that also famously restricted immigration to Jews, right, and to people from Asia as well. No,
yeah. So the way they wrote it into a law was immigration had to be restricted to a proportion of the immigration that was happening in the 1860s or like in the 1870s or something. And so obviously a lot of people who were immigrating into the US in that time were nice, strapping Nordic people who would be pioneering and conquer a continent. But by the time the 1920s came around, there was much less immigration from the Nordics. I don't know. I feel really uncomfortable using.
No, it's okay. Say Hyperboreans, I
think. Yeah, and so obviously that's how they restricted it, because obviously immigrants were largely from South of Europe, Eastern Europe, and were Jewish as well.
Mm-hmm. So just like quick before we go a little bit deeper into him, what time period are we talking of his life? When was he most active?
I think the most active time was 1910s through to his death. There was definitely a drop off after his second book, where there was tension starting to escalate with the Nazis, and Grant's kind of very deep closeness with a lot of key figures in the Nazi regime was increasingly commented upon.
Mm-hmm. But he died also in 37, right? So he
died in 37.
Okay.
And his last kind of engagement was going to a hunting convention organized by Hermann Goering in Germany.
Right.
Which obviously he died before he could get to it. Yeah. So he was like an unabashed Nazi, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Well, he's buried in Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
did not know
the
that.
Sleepy Hollow.
Mm.
So if you want to go fuck up a grave in Sleepy Hollow.
You didn't hear it from us, but
you didn't hear. No, I had not a good choice to ever do that. But if you did,
just recommending crimes on the pod, no big deal.
Yeah,
we take an ambivalent stance towards crimes on the pod. I prefer to say.
Agreed.
Some of us are more pro crime, me maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say it's definitely a you thing.
But you can't talk about it, That's
No, you're right. Yeah. We do not recommend you go to Madison Grant Cemetery, his grave in Sleepy Hollow in Tarrytown, New York, and do anything to it. Anything that you can imagine.
I mean, some mild crimes where there's very little to prove, like a sprinkle of piss, maybe.
Yeah, the pissing of the great race.
There we go. Yes.
There we go.
All right.
We got it.
Episode title.
But I think just thinking about his influence, like going back to him, like what really struck me was how engaged he was in the debates of the time, and in fact how his argument and how his scientific reason was defeated in a kind of in the overall discourse over the decades he was active. Mm-hmm. There's this guy called Franz Boas.
That's my guy.
Oh yeah,
Alex. Yeah. That's my guy.
Really?
Yeah, we're bros.
I mean, I would like to be his bro. He sounds kind of sick, to be honest.
I'll invite you. We meet in the fifth dimension constantly. He was really wrong about that, by the
way. But anyway, really, Grant's a kind of active political and scientific, in quotes, life was a story of defeat and the kind of establishment of of a more rigorous, I suppose, more sociological inclined anthropology as well, which obviously still had many, many issues,
Yeah.
but was not the kind of quasi mystical racism of Grant and his comrades.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the skull caliper era, no, of anthropology.
Yeah,
Indeed.
I hope he was buried with his calipers. Again, I don't recommend grave robbing. I just wanted to make that clear.
I think Grant was more like a big picture guy. Like if he had to have calipers, he would have had to be near degenerate races, which I just get the impression he never really was. Do you know what I mean?
Right, I see. Yeah, more of an armchair eugenicist, huh?
Exactly.
All right. Well, yeah. So we got this guy. Family goes way back to the Mayflower or whatever.
Yeah, literally.
Dad, very successful businessman of some sort.
Surgeon.
Surgeon, was he? Okay.
I guess he's a businessman, really, in this time period.
Well, it is America.
And also, interestingly, like a Civil War kind of hero, if you want a better term.
Okay.
He won an award, Medal of Honor, actually, for saving the life of a Yankee general.
How about that?
In the middle of a battle. Yeah, brave guy.
And so Grant is, I presume, a Yankee. No, he's from the North.
Yeah, he's like well in that kind of northeast Atlantic coast set, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe this is jumping ahead, but what did he think about Southern racism after during Reconstruction, etc.? Do we know anything about this?
I'm not actually sure. He didn't really write too much about like historical stuff. Really, he was mainly concerned with, I guess, present policy debates around immigration, around eugenics, around conservation, and obviously his kind of racial theories as well. But he, like I said before, he was really involved in the anti-intermarriage laws in the South.
Yeah, right.
Presumably, he was quite horrified by Reconstruction, or would have been.
That sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like something that got flooded. Some of those writings, I bet.
Quite possibly. I think his aim was really like conservation, and as was kind of quite common at the time, there was a kind of assumption that theories around conservation and animal protection could then be applied to, and that there was analogies with the races, quote unquote, of humanity, and how breeding programs, for want of a better word, and kind of big state interventions could conserve the best of humanity, which for Grant was the Nordics. And so it is through like his passion in hunting and passions with getting out into wildlife and nature and the wilderness that put him on this course. There's a kind of a quite apocryphal story of Grant visiting Germany in his youth and seeing these like big display of reindeer antlers on a wall in a hunting lodge, and kind of noticing that as the years went by, the antlers got smaller and smaller because the hunters took out the biggest and best animals for their walls, for their trophies, and noticing that if some intervention didn't happen, the great animals would start dying out, and more, I guess, degenerate animals, which is how we thought about things, everything basically, would kind of predominate. And for him, this was a bad thing. I mean, it is a bad thing. Hunting is bad generally, but Grant just wanted,
Grant wanted to just make sure that he could eventually get the big antlers again.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think his approach to conversation was conservation was a lot like this. Like he kind of had this idea of there being these superior species, for example, caribou, elk, moose, and then every other kind of that animal. For example, deer were kind of the lesser degenerate species, and so he applied this to. He implied his racial theories of superior and inferior races to the animal species as well.
There's also this issue of conservation being exactly the result, or rather, the conservation movement sort of being an after effect of colonial expansion in the U.S. and like the mass destruction of, buffalo, for instance, and this, I feel like there's definitely a parallel here to the logic behind racist sciences coming from the same class, where they see in front of them the effects of empire or capitalism or whatever it is, and and instead of, imagining a different way to approach the world, they see their job as being stewards of the entire thing and rationalizing everybody's logical place in it. So it's very easy to see how the same class of people is going to come up with some of the same solutions,
Yeah, definitely. And like Americans of this time had this idea of wilderness. And I think kind of Americans, a lot of different people still have this idea of like nature as this like untouched Edenic kind of landscape in which, the reason why it needs to be preserved is because it has not been interfered with in any way. And of course,
they call it virgin, which is just gross.
Right.
It tells you exactly what they want to do to it.
Yeah. So horrible.
Yes.
Yeah. And but of course they would not consider the fact that people indigenous to that continent were, in working with nature and changing nature around them, whether it's through their, general life, living off the land, but also like actually quite advanced nature management efforts, like controlled burns of various woodlands to preserve the best trees, for example, which is a practice that, indigenous people of America were doing for a while. And it's and I actually find Grant's attitude towards people indigenous to America quite fascinating. I mean, it's not surprising, but he basically dismissed them as already dying out, of being an inferior race, of being conquered by the Nordics and the colonizers, and therefore have absolutely no concern to Grant whatsoever. And so these people quite neatly kind of drop out of his racial schema. And it just goes to show how, like, a lot of his theories are so reflective of himself and his own feelings about himself and his position in class society and within the racial structure of America.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would kind of expect him to also take that same conservation logic and apply it to native groups in the United States, but he just sort of didn't consider them. It was their time.
Yeah, yeah. It's like they're done. Like next, and it kind of exposes some of the many weaknesses with his fanciful arguments. Really.
Yeah, interesting too that this should come from sporting hunters. I mean, like you said, Madison Grant joined the what's it called, Crockett and Boone Society,
Boone and Crockett Club. Yeah,
Boone and Crockett Club,
which had the purpose of initially to promote manly sports with a rifle.
Right. Which is, yes, named after Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, who, if you are from Texas, you already have a song playing in your head, and if you're not, it's two celebrated hunters. One of them has a fucking hat named after him.
Funny little
dead
hat,
animal. Yeah. Raccoon hat.
I mean, some of Grant's first kind of activism and what the Boone and Crockett Club was concerned with was the distinction between like kind of sportsmanlike hunting and what they deemed like unsportsmanlike hunting, which was involved a lot of unscrupulous tactics like driving animals into the sea or into inhospitable environments in order to easily pick them off or things like this.
God, these motherfuckers. Because it's the same shit they say later on about sportsmanlike capitalism, versus like the dirty capitalism. Or even when we get to, when like Kristallnacht happens, we get a bunch of fascists in the U.S. Essentially complaining that it was unsportsmanlike. It was a mob. It was a riot. It was dirty. It needs rules and fuck them.
Yeah.
Also, they treat this like a sport, don't they? I feel like these eugenicists also approached the, I'm putting this in air quotes, science of eugenics as like a trophy hunt a lot of the times. Like they wanted to be the one that had the biggest collection of, I don't know, Nordic noses, and or like they want to be the guy who gets to set their flag on some other eugenic discovery about criminality and stuff. It's for me, it all seems like they're constantly sporting.
I mean, I'm guessing that probably has everything to do with the background that they're coming from, right? I'd imagine that Madison Grant's academic qualifications are based on the fact that he comes from an established wealthy WASP family and got to go to probably the best Ivy League schools, and so that's why people take him seriously, and they know that, and so they just want to get in there and push out their, ideas and grab the trophy as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I guess it's important to say that he was friends with Theodore Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
Definitely.
Big stars on the show.
I think what really grates me about these guys is that they're just so, it's like the class struggle in me really comes out. They're so fucking rich.
Yes.
And so they can just affect anything they want in the world. So like Grant, he gets into Yale.
Yes.
He gets into Yale in his sophomore year because he's had so much tutoring beforehand that he can just pass the exam with flying colors.
Well, and his dad probably bought the cafeteria or some shit, I don't know.
For real. Yeah, like that's obviously. He gets into Columbia law school. He never actually practices law or passes the bar because he doesn't need to.
Right.
He maintains
Amazing.
He maintains an office on Wall Street anyway, just because he can, even though he's out hunting and in the wilderness a lot of the time. And the kind of wider set that he's involved in, they found a Museum of Natural History. They find the National Zoological Society. They have the ability to affect these changes and put forward in very material sense their political and scientific quote unquote ideas in a way that is denied to basically everybody else in America at the time.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, they had the power to make the Brooklyn Zoo and stick a bunch of people behind cages in it. I mean, that's just
like Madison Grant is responsible for the human zoo. It's just crazy. Like,
whoa, okay.
Yeah. So the story, I don't know if you know the story, but the poor guy, Otto Benga, which obviously I don't think was his name. I think he was a name that was given to him.
Yeah.
The original plan was to put him in the primate enclosure with the, orangutans and the chimpanzees and everybody else and all the other kind of
to
animals.
Express like that he was like a less evolved or a missing link, right? This was some of the original propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. And the poor guy was only there a week, and the public outcry was so great, like that they had to kind of backtrack really quickly about having him in the enclosure. I mean, obviously, rightly so. But the guy ended up killing himself because he wanted to go back to his home and his family, and there was literally he wasn't able to do that, and so out of desperation, he shot himself in the chest. Years later, but still obviously living in misery all that time.
Madison Grant, yay! Spreads joy everywhere.
Indeed.
You know who else? Just since we're on Yale for a second, I just thought it'd be fun for the Tenepod audience to just do a little Yale yearbook of all the people that we've covered on this show who have graduated from Yale.
I'm actually fascinated to hear about this.
Well, this is just it's a short list so far. I'd like to develop it. I think there's a lot more here. But we've got, of course, Madison Grant. Yeah. How about William Luther Pierce III?
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
National Alliance. Really? How about Henry Fairfield Osborne? We talked about in Ray's last eugenics episode. That was a tight friend of Grant's here, but okay. Lawrence Dennis, we know, went to Yale. We did a few episodes on him just recently. Of course, you can't forget Prescott Bush. I think he counts. Smedley Butler. But he actually, he was in the he was the one they picked to lead the fascist coup against America, but he ratted on them to the country. That was Smedley. William Potter Gale claims to have graduated from Yale. I think that might be controversial. A lot of American Legion guys. Robert Wood, also completely psychotic. We talked about him a lot in a few episodes now. Alan Dulles. Come on. I mean, this is, Yale.
Can't believe you forgot about James Angleton.
James Angleton went to Yale but didn't graduate.
Oh.
But, you know what? I'm going to give
we'll give him the honorary degree.
Yeah, honorary degree. That's exactly right. Yes.
Of course, there's Nicola Kalaya as well.
Of course. Jesus fucking Christ. So Yale, let's just keep it going. That's our motto at Yale.
Yeah, well done, Yale.
I'm not sure if Vonsiatsky was enrolled in Yale briefly.
Who?
Vonsiatsky.
Oh God, yeah, sure. Why not? I feel like half of our show could probably get an honorary degree from Yale at this point.
Well, the rich ones.
Yeah, well, yes, the rich ones, obviously. So sorry, Madison Grant. Top of the list there.
Brief diversion, I guess.
Brief diversion, yeah. So he goes off to Columbia, like you said, studies law, but it's not really his main interest, obviously.
Yeah, who wants to study law when you're doing human zoos? I mean, what the fuck?
Human zoos. That's every fucking frat boy's dream.
Fuck, crazy. I mean, I think the thing about Grant as well, and what it speaks to his kind of position in society and his richness, is that it's only been, incredibly recently where his efforts as a conservationist have started to be questioned. Like it was only, I think, in like 2019 when his name was taken off various monuments in the California National Park system, like the Redwood Reserve and things like this. In the original dedication to Grant, which was put down in 1949, I think, so after the Second World War. He was described as a conservationist, an author, and a defender of nature or whatever. And absolutely no mention of the actual content of what he was writing or what he was pushing in society.
It should have said defender of the natural order, at least.
Natural order, yeah.
So I see here that he was involved with several national parks, huh? So it's just the Redwoods, but Glacier National Park, Denali, which was formerly named McKinley after the president that got smoked by Chelgosh.
Yes. Yep. Leon.
Yeah, he was like legitimately involved in saving various kind of for example, the most famous one is the American bison, which Grant founded a park just for the bison. So I'm not saying to give him any merits, of course, but the legacy of American conservation and nature management really is tied up with Grant. And I think for a long time the response was not to really think about it so much.
Right.
And now the response is to let's get him away from everything. The Museum of Natural History has a very weird complex about talking about Grant and Fairfield Osborne. Like they just kind of got a real they get real quiet and they don't talk to you if you ask questions about him.
I can imagine.
Yeah, which is we need to consider these people within the legacies of these institutions as well.
I mean, there's a particular, I think, irony with being involved with conservation for the American bison, given that they were hunted to near extinction in a very unsportsmanlike way.
Yes. Right,
in order to ethnically cleanse the Midwest from native people.
Yeah, and the response is not, let's not treat the world like it's our personal fucking backyard. The response is, let's just do that in a more managed way so we can shoot,
And I'd imagine he was fine with the genocide aspect of that. And it's like, okay, now that's done with. Let's bring back the buffalo.
Right? Yeah, they lost. Actually, I'm looking forward to hearing about the racial lore too. But Alex,
yeah, we should get into the racial lore a little bit because it really does inform everything Grant does. I guess maybe we could actually say his basic premise, which is I think the way I've seen it put, which I find most helpful, is Grant, instead of a Marxist idea of history being about class struggle, for Grant, history is about race struggle. And of course, we can't untie race and class from this. Grant thought that because of his and his friends' racial characteristics, they were rightfully in the position of they were, in a high class position, and so we, in many ways, him talking about race is him also talking about class. This was earned because of
evolutionary selection. Is it tied to the survival of the fittest, sort of?
So the theory is that the Nordic race are so kind of superior, have so many superior characteristics, and this is not just kind of physical characteristics like virility and strength and daring do and that kind of thing, but also kind of mental,
the Faustian spirit.
Exactly. More intelligent, more discerning, an ability to reason and demonstrate kind of administrative capacities and basically being figures of authority in society. And of course, that's why and this is a common theme in eugenics as well at the time, that oftentimes eugenicists are anti-war because they say that war is dysgenic. So like of course, because the Nordics are the bravest of all the races, they are going to die more in war because they're going to be right at the front lines, killing each other. And therefore the kind of cowardly lesser races will survive the war and the degeneration of the race will continue. But
that's an interesting tension with some of their contemporaries who were of the mind that war is what brings the natural elite out from the dregs.
Right. I mean, it brings them out, but it brings them out to kill them, I guess.
Well, yes. I mean, gloriously though, Alex, gloriously.
Of course.
I guess, I mean, this is like a more kind of genteel approach, like, I don't know, than the kind of more macho brings out the warriors.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are the officer class. Like, they're not the ones on the front line. They're the ones telling people to go onto the front line. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Now, when you say Nordic race, how was that being defined by somebody like Grant?
I mean, Grant borrows a lot of stuff from a lot of different people.
Sure.
So the passing the great race is unoriginal in that it takes from a lot of different eugenicists and racial thinkers before him. I think the main guy we could think about is a guy called Arthur de Gobineau.
Oh, good. Yeah, please talk about him. We brought him up in the last couple eugenics episodes, and he's still on our periphery.
Yeah, he's this like creepy aristocratic French guy who developed this kind of polygenetic I think that's the way to say it. Basically, his idea was that there was many different sources of humanity, many different origins of humanity, and that's why we have these distinctions of races, because they originated in different places and were therefore weirdly environmentally defined by their environments in which they were kind of genetically composed, I guess. And so he had this distinction between Nordic races, Alpine races, Mediterranean races, obviously Jews are their own separate category, and then various other degenerate people like black people, for example, or whatever. And Nordics were particularly kind of superior because they were born in these harsh, cold environments. They had to display a great deal more ingenuity to survive, and it created this kind of martial, upstanding culture in which, from which kind of Nordics of today are from. And of course, in the Mediterranean, in the Alpine, he had this whole system. Like the Alpine people were naturally servile because they lived in mountains. I guess, I don't know. I can't remember the actual reasoning.
Famously not harsh place to live, no?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and everything grows on a mountain.
Yeah, exactly. You can just living life luxury up there.
Yeah, you got your tubers and your, leaves, branches.
Yeah, you can live off a branch, easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, there was this kind of very defined and very kind of immutable racial hierarchy, which of course Grant and Gobineau and all these different people placed themselves at the top because they were there already. So there must have been a racial reason why they were there. And from this kind of all Grant's, the rest of the book kind of springs from this premise. And I think it's in his discourse and in his activism, because he was like an activist of his time, where we really see these kind of principles play out as well.
I'm wondering now if, maybe you can help answer this. So since like the Nordics are the ones that were hardened and militarized by this harsh environment, so that would kind of make the UK where all these like lazy Nordics ended up, right? Where they had the benefit of the Gulf Stream or the whatchamacallit, the North Atlantic Drift. Is this something that you're aware of?
I'm aware of the Gulf Stream, but I don't think Grant really put it into his book.
Lazy Nordic theory.
I haven't heard the lazy Nordic theory.
Well, okay.
I think this is a Fritz theory.
Well, I'm writing it down. Lazy Nordic theory.
You could do the passing of the Great Ways too,
Oh my God, that's a great idea.
The Nordics are passing because they've just got real lazy guys. The Gulf Stream has really fucked shit up.
It did, yeah, and they all went to live in the UK, where they just ate eels.
The funny thing about this theory as well is that it kind of keeps coming back. like eugenics in the library kind of classification system has moved from the sciences where it was originally to either history or history of social ideas or whatever, and has become an object of study rather than a system, a system in
Yeah.
and of itself.
Yeah.
But we say in the book, we found this study in the book from like 2006 in the journal Intelligence, which is a really high rated scientific journal,
Well, it's in the name.
in which two, I guess, scientists basically put forward the theory of Grant, of this kind of Nordic harsh environments created these people and created more intelligent people in this study in 2006. And interestingly, in the journal, there's an immediate rebuttal to it. So I don't think it should ever have been published because it's clearly pseudoscience.
Yeah, right.
But the rebuttal points out that they had this kind of, they claimed to have found a causal link between skin color and intelligence IQ scores across nations.
Mhm.
And the way they kind of identified skin colors was they had a panel of 3 graduate students who rated different nations' skin colors on a 6-point scale.
Oh my God. Okay.
And then link that to national studies of IQ.
My God.
Obviously, this is incredibly unscientific, and mainly because, like, in giant countries like China or America, for example, like, how do you get an average skin color out of this, for example? But also, it ignores more basic things like IQ tests were invented in the West, and they test Western kind of structures of intelligence, which ignores many, many other forms of intelligence that are out there in the world. So I guess my diversion on this point was really to say that these ideas keep coming back. And
do you know what university that was done at? That's amazing.
That's nuts. Yeah.
Let me look it up because we have a reference in the book, and I am going to go to it now.
I bet it's fucking Yale.
Can you imagine?
I can. Yes.
Yeah, it comes full circle. Like,
yes.
I mean, this is the kind of
study...
stuff that like is not out of place in like dark Enlightenment circles, or like, just like shit you see on the internet and Twitter and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the study is called Temperature, Skin Color, Per Capita Income, and IQ.
Oh my
an
God.
International Perspective in Intelligence, Volume issue 34.
Oh, nothing wrong here.
I'm just putting that into, so Donald Templer and Hiroki Arikawa, interestingly have an editorial note on controversial papers in this issue. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know where these guys were from. Let me just see. Fresno, apparently. So not Yale.
Well, that's from Fresno.
I don't know what Fresno means, but
I mean, it means that they're not fucking Nordics. That's for sure. I mean, like if that's supposed to make you elevate your IQ and shit, I guess that'd be
to a place with California weather. State University, Fresno. I mean, probably, I guess not the most celebrated institution, perhaps.
Well, it's because it's so warm. The brain, you see, has nothing to battle in its pathimathos towards enlightenment.
Is that so?
That's so.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally the characteristics of the Mediterranean peoples. It's that warm climates makes them lazy. So therefore,
That's what I'm talking about. Lazy Nords. It's going to be huge. All right. So it's still there. And it's insane. That's insane that intelligence even bothered to refute it. You know what I mean? Wrong journal. For sure. Or I guess not.
I mean, they published it. So
they published it, so it is the right journal. Yeah.
So clearly it passed through enough people that were just like, oh, yeah, why not?
I mean, I was re-listening to some of those old...
Readership is down. Let's stir some shit by bringing back, early 20th century eugenics.
Yeah. A controversial idea. Exactly. I mean, I was thinking about all the times that Nature published studies on Uri Geller's ability to bend spoons and stuff, These crowds.
Yeah. I mean, I think academia has a lot to answer for. I'm going to leave it at that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's start with Yale. We need a public tribunal.
I guess thinking a bit more about where Grant's ideas went to as well. A lot of this stuff is, you can just see it all over in the American right and the global right as well. we're just thinking about like kind of national conservatism and these kind of quite really modern movements and intellectual kind of thinkings, and how that translates into policy as well. Like this kind of border regime that we have all over Europe and in America as well, is the fundamental ideological underpinnings of a lot of that activism, and a lot of that policy is this racial threat, essentially, of these criminal, violent, sexually kind of virile people who are going to come and do various horrible things to us and our women and our beautiful kind of Western society. Like this whole fall of the West thing,
right,
is all linked to Grant ultimately.
Yeah, like, oh, the migrants, they're all men, and they have, smartphones, so clearly they're not poor or whatever. And you see how they behave. Yeah, it's not too different at all.
Exactly.
So I guess since we're talking about his racial ideas, when does The Passing of the Great Race come out, and how was it received?
So it came out. There was so many editions. It came out in 1916. We have it in 1915 in the book, but I think 1916, and there was many editions. And I think the thing that struck me most about Grant, going back and looking at the kind of history of the publishing as well, he was published by Scribner, which was a really kind of well-known conservative inclined publishing house.
Yeah.
And they became basically the go-to publishers of eugenicist writing in America. Interestingly, Fairfield Osborne basically made the introduction for Grant to the publishers and wrote an introduction for the book. Funnily enough, despite Grant had this kind of reputation at the publishers for being a very difficult author. He would visit bookshops all around America and then write letters to his editor saying, "Why is this book not being stocked in this shop in Rochester? You must immediately send copies."
All right.
He was quite infamous for instead of trying to make very small minor revisions, he wanted to rewrite the book over and over again, which was of course a very, very costly process.
Yes.
He was there's internal notes at the publisher saying, if Grant carries on this way, then we're never going to sell any of his books because he's being just so annoying to all these bookshops.
God,
but
it's almost as if he's like a piece of shit that doesn't know what he's talking about. He has to constantly rewrite this thing.
And also, so a good comparison maybe is to Osborne, his book on paleontology. I think the book was about peoples of the Stone Age. Sold around 11,000 copies, which is quite a lot for the time. Grant, in comparison, despite his pushing of this book at any opportunity, he didn't just visit bookstops. He sent review copies to every influential person in America.
Okay.
He could sent one to the president, sent one to Roosevelt, all over.
Bought the rights to the film.
Well, yeah, right. He only sold around 3,500 copies. Despite this,
you just need to sell one copy to Hitler to make
one
it a
copy
classic,
to Hitler, one copy to the president.
There you go.
This is the thing, and I think we'll get back to why I'm so fucked off with these people, is that they really only had to sell to themselves, and they had the power to affect the kings they wanted to see, right?
Exactly.
Grant was never a populist in that way. And indeed, his alternative to the American Anthropological Society, I said he had this big feud with Franz Boas. The organization he set up was not a membership organization. It was controlled by originally 16 fellows, and that was the membership. People could subscribe to the newspaper and the magazine or whatever, but eventually this was expanded to 32. So maybe as his life went on, his populist leanings went forward. But
he doubled his readership, Alex. So you can't poo-poo that.
Yeah, and there was a really funny bit later on in the history of that organization where there was this massive fight about lay members being allowed to add something to the agenda or being able to form an agenda for meetings.
Okay.
And it was like a massive fight, which Grant fought until he died, basically.
Oh God. Oh my God. I'm glad that those were his fucking dying thoughts. That satisfies me. Sometimes again, with fellow Yalesman, William Luther Pierce III, knowing that he died slumped over waiting for medical care in Mexico because he refused to go to a Jewish doctor. There are some like satisfying moments, and I'm glad that fucking Madison Grant spent his last minutes just fuming over some sort of minor detail to their little club's constitution.
Well, the best bit about Grant and of his fuming was he fought to the end to not allow cameras into the Bronx Zoo because he was way too populist. He wanted people to see the animals in person. He didn't want people to take away photographs of their experience. And so on this very minor policy detail of this institution he was involved with, he was having reports about how it was progressing on his deathbed. So this is the kind of guy we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that tells you something, though, about him. Because, I mean, not just, like, the need to manage everything, but something struck me about the fact that he was worried about photographs and what it was taking away from someone's relationship to the animals that he had, caged up there. And how of all the things that remove an animal of its dignity, regardless of how, whatever nice the Bronx Zoo is, it's weird that he's worried about the cheapening of the experience, that he has. Maybe I would just immediately wonder if this somehow also relates to his class's constant annoyance with the new rising rich in the U.S. And how they what's the word? How mass reproduction of goods cheapens this noble process of like the American businessman. I don't know. There's a lot of parallels here. It's somehow his reactions to little things, even like that, line up a lot, and they make me think about all these other rich assholes we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think Grant very much wasn't interested in the democratization of knowledge in any way whatsoever, and these kinds of technological changes really did horrify him. Which, I guess, it really does speak to his kind of very patrician attitudes as well.
Well, yes. Yeah. And I think it also says a lot that the guy who wrote The Passing of the Great Race ran a zoo. I feel like those two things together should give us some hint of what these people have in store for us.
Yeah.
What a bunch of rubes.
Especially since, you come to conservation through like the practice of like prestige sport hunting.
Well, yeah.
And that's how you come to like appreciate, nature or whatever.
Yes. And we were also musing a little bit, I think in Ray's last episode, about the apparent coincidence. Again, this is something I just looked up real quick. I haven't really spent any time on it since, so somebody can correct me on this. But the seeming coincidence that genetics as a whole, as of institutionalized form of study, came back into prominence after a long Middle Ages of it really not being around, exactly when we were challenging the idea that human beings can be property and capital and resources in a major way. And they sort of seem to latch on to this narrative of the elite having already been chosen.
I thought that was something that really interested me, in that the thing that a big influence on the eugenics movement was I think he was phrased, the rediscovery of Gregor Mendel's work. Like,
that's what I was thinking about, actually. Exactly, Gregor Mendel,
latched onto this actually quite pioneering study that had a lot of correct things about it,
right?
In order to kind of develop this ideology of racial domination and racial hierarchy.
Yeah, but even Mendel's work, I mean, it wasn't that far removed, from the eugenics period. It wasn't that long. It was, it was still in a, it's 19th century. It's still still part of this. I think it was the 1820s or something. I forget.
1820s,
exactly something like this. But it's a very interesting time because also, as this is developing, I can't stop thinking about the parallel spiritual institutions that were developing alongside, and the kind of like the whole paranormal movement that was running parallel with some of the same families involved in this supposedly hard science of the natural order with this these vast spiritualist networks of people trying to give a scientific veneer to old ruling class ideas about the spirit. It's very strange and troubling that this stuff is still Yeah, showing up in journals today.
Yeah, I mean, there's really interesting parallels between the more mystical stuff as well, like Hyperborea and that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
I'm just interested about, and I suppose this is an object of study which someone should take on, is the interlinking between those two movements as well.
Yes.
Because it seems to me from my research that they were kind of on kind of twin tracks, but what was the crossover? Where was the connections as well?
Yeah. That's my feeling as well. I think it means something that the entire time we've been studying eugenics here on the show for the last few episodes of it, my mind has been with the Rhine ESP labs the entire time.
As they often are, Fritz.
Yeah. Well, that's true, though. You're right. This is me, so it could just mean it's a weekday.
Did Grant have any kind of connections to that world, or generally have some sort of religious or spiritual philosophies?
Yeah, that was my question too.
I don't really know, to be honest. It's not something I've seen in the text.
It's weird with these old patricians, some of this, because I get confused about a lot of their religious backgrounds. I think they're just white. Like, I think they just came over as some kind of like white Christian before there were 1,000 denominations in the country, and they were just the original fucking, Or those denominations as institutions mean a lot to them, but like the actual whatever religion behind it doesn't. So like, I don't know whether they're Presbyterians or a lot of them is important. Yeah, some Episcopalians. Yeah,
I think you're right, Boris. Like, they're part of the institutional fabric of America, and these very old churches are part of that institutional fabric, and therefore, like, they're nominally Christian, nominally kind of, they probably do attend church, a lot of them, but like every Sunday. But what meaning that has on their, everything is marshaled towards this ulterior goal, right? Like, it's not like there's anything that challenges their kind of perspectives in any way.
Yeah.
Except for Franz Boas.
Dear Franz. Have you talked about Franz before?
Actually.
You've mentioned,
but he's, I came up in anthropology in the States, so
gotcha.
He's quite close to my heart.
I basically only know him through doing research on Grant, and the fact that they had this kind of, I think Spiro describes it as this intellectual Cold War. Like, they would never really go at each other in public. It would all be behind the scenes. Boas wrote this really scathing review of The Passing of the Great Race, which is, you should go look it up if you're interested, just because of how much he goes in on Grant and on his ideas.
Yes.
But Boas had this very deliberate, very cultivated, decades-long campaign against Grant and his ideas, which involved getting a load of doctoral students under his wing, taking over the American Anthropological Society and taking it from Grant. And ultimately, this nature versus nurture debate, which obviously is much more complicated than this binary. Ultimately, nature and environmental influences won in the kind of general discourse of America. I would say well before the Second World War broke out as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm getting this correctly from what I implied through what you said, Grant had some sort of position in the American Anthropological Society?
I think it was. I don't think he had a position, but the society was essentially a vehicle for scientific racism, and like an amateur old boy kind of set were in control of it, and thinking of anthropology as this kind of very the study of zoology, but for humans. Boas, and for Boas and others, like, that was completely wrong. Like, humans, like traits like alcoholism or propensity to criminality was not a kind of inherent racial characteristic. It was an environmental characteristic ultimately. And another part of Boas's campaign was the kind of professionalization of anthropology, making it into its own subset of academia and not some kind of rich guy hobby. In order to develop the respect and develop the gravitas within American discourse, in order to push this kind of rich guy amateur version of anthropology out of polite society, really.
Yeah, that's what I mean about their sort of sportsman attitude towards like everything they touch. I mean, anthropology for them was an extension of like the colonial safari for so many of them. It was just more sport, something to write about,
And Boaz was
Right,
was Jewish, no, right? I'd
Also.
assume that kind
Boaz
of
is
informed
Jewish
his disdain for Madison Grant, no?
Yeah.
Boaz is Jewish, and Grant would say in letters to his editor, like, the reason why Boaz is so against me is because obviously he's Jewish and he doesn't want to be put in this kind of racial category that he naturally is in. And Boaz's graduate students who eventually gained PhDs under him, I
Yeah.
think
Me,
only
Benedict,
3 of them.
Kraber.
Yeah, only 3 of them weren't Jewish. Like the rest were all Jewish. Most of them were immigrants as well. Like these were kind of very unashamed. They were quite happy to be a threat to Grant and
Yeah,
come
Grant's
from
nightmare, basically, huh?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a bit of a coup.
Yes. So when did his influence on the German Nazis and also his connections with them began? And how did this develop?
So in the kind of, I guess, mid-1920s, the German translation of The Passing of the Great Race came out. And it was published by a guy called J.F. Lehman. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Who was, an avowed anti-Semite. He was a member of the Nazi Party since 1920, so a very early member, and had published guys like Henry Ford and Lothrop Stoddard as well. And I think it's hard to really underestimate the influence of American eugenics on the Nazis and Nazi policy as well. I guess the biggest influence you could see was the sterilization law, which came in just after the Nazi Party took power. But I think it's really important to keep in mind how active Grant was in his kind of influence and activity towards German eugenics and the Nazis. Like his publisher Schreiber was really keen to bring out a German translation basically as soon as the final edition of Passing of the Great Race came out. And Grant was in constant contact with German eugenicists as well. He would regularly send them eugenics journals from America. And of course, in books like Mein Kampf, Hitler makes really improving reference to the Immigration Restriction Act that we've already talked about, and echoes a lot of Grantian kind of ideas around racial hygiene and the importance of preserving the species. Hitler, kind of quite famously wrote that his commandment was, "Thou shalt preserve the species."
Yeah.
And it's not just in the Sterilization Act, but also in the Final Solution itself and in the Project of the Holocaust. German eugenicists with whom Grant was in contact with before he died were, right at the heart of planning that and putting that kind of policy into action, basically. And Grant's ideas were really, really they found a really receptive audience, of course. In 1920s Germany, this kind of popular anti-Semitism started to take on this pseudo-scientific edge, into which Grant's books were really, kind of fertile ground for Grant's work. And so, it's all very well to understand Grant as this conservationist who saved the redwood and saved the American bison, etc., but he was also had this really quite extensive influence on Nazism and on anti-Semitism in Germany more broadly. I think a really good kind of, I guess, benchmark for this is that in the reading list that the Nazi Party put forward on the racial question in 1936, Grant's book was one of 2 English language books that were included in that list. All the rest were German.
Okay. Was the other one maybe International Jew by Henry Ford?
I think it probably was, yeah.
Well, we got them all covered, guys. We did the whole reading list. The whole English reading list here.
And do you know if Grant was sympathetic to Nazis only in regards to these racist questions, or was he an actual National Socialist? Did he think that it's a good political movement for Germany, but we do things in America differently and so on? Did he say anything about this? Is it recorded, or did he have any contacts with the American Nazis at the time?
I don't think he had any contact with American Nazis. I haven't seen that, but I think he was excited, like a scientist was excited that his work was being forwarded or put into practice in another place, right? Like he was very excited that eugenicists were so much more advanced in Germany. And obviously he did correspond with Hitler. And in the kind of blurbs for his second book, Conquest of a Continent, a quote from Hitler was included as part of the promotional material.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So, and in fact, there's an interesting letter from a subscriber to the publisher, kind of cancelling her subscription because of Hitler's of their including of Hitler's recommendation of the book. And Grant and his editor have this really condescending exchange of letters where they kind of like laugh that this woman is objecting to this inclusion of this guy, to the inclusion of Hitler in the promotion material.
Mm.
And that book's called The Conquest of a Continent, you said?
Conquest of a Continent, which is his book from 1933.
Sounds like a kind of self-explanatory title, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's the extensive of Passion of the Great Waste, and it's obviously Conquest of a Continent is referring to this idea because white people aren't indigenous to America, and because they are, it's this colonial project, like this idea of the pioneering spirit of the American white man who was able to conquer this whole continent and sweep away all the kind of racially degenerate people who were living there, and found this kind of shining America.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very familiar to this show, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I read that like it's quite unlikely that Hitler read Passing of the Great Race, at least initially.
Oh, as a bookshelf filler, huh? One of those guys.
Yeah, but yeah. A lot of his ideas, I think, came from that book because the kind of scientific people he surrounded himself with had read the book.
Well, yeah.
And were big fans of Grant, right? So, like,
sure,
these things filtered through to Hitler.
Yeah, right. Rosenberg, I bet, was
they gave him the Cliff Notes.
Sure.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So basically, we're on top, right?
This is excellent work.
All these guys down here, we don't want them. We don't like them. All right. Man, I just imagine that if, all right, imagine if eugenics didn't get this bad name in the US because of the Nazis. Imagine that it was able to continue forward at full speed. Imagine what the Cold War would have been like, because we know that already they were doing all sorts of crazy fucking psychic experiments, nonsense, ridiculous garbage on the mere suggestion that the Soviet Union had their own ESP program. Imagine if they thought the Soviet Union was like advancing in some eugenics program. Like they would have had tons really
of
bad
human breeding programs.
Oh my God, yes, in a heartbeat, yes.
The shit that would have been going down in Wyoming would have been off the wall. You know what I mean? Like,
yes. Well, there you go. A fun Tenepod alternate history with 12 rules for what?
Oh God, can you imagine?
The Coming of the Great Race 2. It'll be out on Polity Press. No, I doubt it.
Funnily enough, the editor of our book ended up leaving Polity to go be part of some anti-woke right-wing publishing effort. So,
all right,
maybe don't put that in a podcast. But
Aw.
I guess you can. It's fine. He did do that. So.
It's just a fact.
Yeah,
it's a fun fact. That's all that
is. It's a fun fact. A fun, embarrassing fact for us. Yeah.
Yes. Just like eugenics is to the sciences in America. Brought it around. That is professionalism.
I mean, just one last thing on that.
Please.
Like, for a longest time, like, people just ignored, like, just decided to deal with the fact that a lot of their discipline, genetics discipline, was basically sprang out of eugenics movement by basically ignoring it completely.
Right.
And
exactly.
it really did stunt a lot of science because, like for like a lot of these kind of scientific discoveries were like actually quite important for genetics, like for the kind of scientific projects of genetics, and just to ignore them completely was a really interesting way of dealing with it. I think our version of it now, where we actually talk about it and like put it in its context and decide, how we can critically analyze it, is much better.
Yeah. Well, not being somebody with 3 first names and like a third behind him, I guess I don't feel personally involved in covering any of this up,
Right.
My parents were some dysgenic Irish, German, Polish mixture. I mean, it would be a nightmare for Grant to share a pierogi with them.
Were Slavs not in the
no,
cold living
definitely
people?
not. No.
Okay, yeah. That's
I mean, it was cold. It's cold, but like no.
The wrong kind of cold.
the wrong kind.
Yeah, exactly.
The cold that degenerates you instead of making you stronger. I guess I don't know.
Yes.
Fuck.
That's good science. All right. Well, Alex, thanks a lot for coming on and giving us the old Madison Grant rundown.
Yeah,
we've been looking forward to for a couple years here.
Yeah,
you're so welcome.
Turns out the arc we did before we had you on just now was really long. I didn't really realize 2 years had gone by. So, we should hang out more often is what I guess I'm saying.
We should. You should come on to 12 Rules and talk about something.
Well, listen, we're going to close out the ep here, and I'll stop recording in a second, but stay on for 1 second because I want to tell you something I found before I let you go. But before that, let me just say, thanks again. That's 12 Rules for What? You can find it pretty much anywhere you find our podcast, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I listen to it on like Spotify, but it's everywhere. And definitely check it out. I think you guys, you put out about an episode a month at this point, something like that.
Yeah, we're getting into a nice rhythm of it again. I got a new co-host as well. So.
Oh wow! Okay,
awesome.
Well, definitely we'll be listening to that. All right. And any written stuff you want to promote? Are you working on anything like that?
I actually not right now, but maybe in a few months. I'll if I get round to it, I'll send it on to you.
Well, there you go.
Awesome.
I'll read it. All right, Alex. Thanks
Cheers.
a lot.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
thank you.
It's
Bye.
great.
Bye.
Hey there, all you free people enjoying your free episodes from The Empire Never Ended. Maybe scoot on over to patreon.com/tenepod and become a patron. We publish 3 additional premium episodes there alongside the 2 freebies each month. We're on Twitter too, also at Tenepod, but our Patreon is really where it's at. See you there, maybe?
We didn't originate on this planet.